Good morning. Welcome bright and early on a Monday to the Wilson Center. I'm Jane Harmon, President and CEO, recovering politician. For many, many years, too many for some of my detractors, I spent time in the House of Representatives working on security and intelligence issues, and numbers of people sitting here are my friends on a bipartisan basis. And I'm very excited that we are doing something truly useful this morning, which is to host a panel discussion on security clearance, a next-gen overhaul. And if you don't understand what next-gen means, you probably should leave the room. Today's problems are digital, but too many of our policies and politicians are analog. Anyone who's held a secret or top secret clearance knows what I mean. Parts of our system fit the 19th century, like the paper time cards we're still stuck with here at the Wilson Center. Not kidding. Bottom line, if we want a workforce that's secure and talented, our approach to security clearances needs an overhaul, ASAP. The way we do business right now has at least 3 serious problems. First, we're not getting the right people in the door. More than ever, we need individuals with language skills and cultural savvy working in national security. But it's too hard for a native Arabic speaker with an aunt in Ramadi to make it to the FBI. We also need folks who know their way around a keyboard. But as FBI Director James Comey has pointed out, it's hard to attract that talent when you have zero tolerance for past marijuana use. Second, we're not catching the people who really do pose an insider threat. Whatever you think of Edward Snowden, and I don't think well of Edward Snowden, everyone can agree that it was too easy for him to get the access he got. We have to get smarter about using big data, open source collection, and behavioral analytics to flag possible security risks. We are getting smarter, but are we getting smart enough? Third, after people make it into the system, we're not securing their information. That's a disservice to our dedicated public servants, including some who are in deep cover, even deep cover as we speak. We must do better. With the right tech and the right approach, we can. And we have a phenomenal panel here to suggest some 21st century solutions. Introducing our speakers is a close friend of the Wilson Center, Chris Kojum. He recently chaired the National Intelligence Council, AKA the NIC, and he now serves as a visiting professor at George Washington's Elliott School of International Affairs. He also contributed to a fabulous book on intelligence oversight that we are putting together with NYU's Center on Law and Security. It will be released soon from Oxford University Press. Chris, before that, had 25 years, I think we just calculated that, a quarter of a century with the vaunted Lee Hamilton, my predecessor here. He served here for 12 years, and before that, all of you know, was the enormously valued chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and recently received the Presidential Medal of Honor. Chris was on the House Foreign Affairs Committee for 15 years and worked on the Iraq Study Group and was Deputy Director of the 9/11 Commission, all with Lee Hamilton. Please join me in welcoming him now.
Thank you. With profound thanks to the Wilson Center and to President Harmon for sponsoring today's discussion, I believe deeply that if we have a national debate on this question, that the views that you will hear today will prevail. The case is compelling. It's my honor and pleasure to introduce the members of the panel. And first I want to start with directly to my left, the Honorable Charles E. Allen, who currently serves as the Security Policy Reform Council Chair at the Intelligence and National Security Alliance, and for the past +6 years, he's been a principal at the Chertoff Group. It would be remiss for me to stop there. Mr. Allen has over 50 years of government service. He served as an undersecretary at the Department of Homeland Security and assistant secretary before that. He was also the assistant director of Central Intelligence for Collection. He and I worked closely, and I have the highest regard for him. Further to my left is the Honorable Joan A. Dempsey, now the Executive Vice President of Booz Allen Hamilton, and formerly she served as the Deputy Director of Central Intelligence for Community Management under President Clinton, and the Executive Director of the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board. Given her responsibility for community management, her direct successor in that function is the Director of National Intelligence. Okay, moving to my right here, immediately to my right is the Honorable Randall Fort, who is the Director of Program Security in the Cyber Domain Team at Raytheon Corporation, and formerly he was the Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of Intelligence and Research at the Department of State, a very fine organization. All the way to my right is Douglas Thomas, who is the Director for Counterintelligence Operations and Corporate Investigations at Lockheed Martin. He's the Principal Deputy Director. He served as the Principal Deputy Director for Counterintelligence in the U.S. government. He has 35 years of service working on counterintelligence issues, and he chaired the National Counterintelligence Operations Board. So the case I'd put to all of you is that the experience and the depth of perspective of those represented on this panel, I think, deserve attention. And so with that, why don't we begin with the first question? And the question is, why do we need security clearance reform? Just as simple and straightforward as that. I'll ask everyone to speak for roughly 3 minutes to the question, and I'll begin with Randy Fort.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you, Jane, for hosting this event, which I think is an important dialogue to have. I'm curious, people in the audience here, how many of you drive a 1950s automobile today? Anybody? Does anybody in the audience have a 1950s telephone that you use? Is there anybody here whose television set is a 1950s model? Anyone? When you go to the dentist, do you expect 1950s dentistry, or are you looking for something a little bit more advanced? Okay, so 1950s is a business model is pretty much over, except in the security clearance business area, which is still mired in that decade in terms of the fundamental processes and mindset of how security is done. There is this bespoke, hand-tooled, we will go around and knock on doors and talk to people who don't even know who you are and check those boxes and assume that somehow that is yielding something, when it does not. And for many, many years, that process has been all but oblivious to the changes in technology. That's not surprising. The federal government was slow to recognize and respond to the PC revolution in the 1980s. They were slow to recognize and respond to the World Wide Web developments in the 1990s. They were slow to recognize and respond to the social media revolution that was taking place in the early 2000s. And we're seeing the same pattern today when it comes to mobility. So not a lot of ability to sort of grasp and understand the impact and influences of these technologies, which continue to double relentlessly in their capacity, their speed, their effectiveness every 12 to 18 months per Moore's law. So we have a system today that is old, it is inefficient, it is ineffective, it is obsolete, it is slow, it is inaccurate, and as we've learned with the OPM announcements of the last several months, it is corrupt. We cannot even trust the information which is held in the various databases at this point because foreign powers have allegedly had access to that, not just taking it, but whatever they've been able to do to manipulate it. So we're looking at a broken system. It's fundamentally broken and unreliable. So this should be the opportunity to recognize that it is 2015. In a few weeks, it will be 2016. We are 15% of the way through the 21st century, and yet we still are relying on this system, which is mired in the middle of the last century. So I think there's a pretty good case to be made that it's time to start looking to the future and these new technologies and figure out a better way to do business.
Okay, thanks, Randy. And I just wanted to mention that we are live on C-SPAN. And next, I'd like to turn to Charlie Allen.
Thank you very much, Chris. Pleasure to be here at the Wilson Center again. I think what Randy just outlined sort of sets the stage for the rest of the discussion here, broad framework that we have to use new and better technologies. When I was at CIA, I thought our security clearance processes at that agency worked reasonably well, not totally efficiently, trying to transfer NSA cleared officers and get them assigned to my staff at CIA. Almost took an intervention by the executive director or by Joan Dempsey to make things happen. When I went to the Department of Homeland Security, where I was the undersecretary to Secretary Chertoff, I found the process different and very slow and very difficult. So when I left government in 2009, it was my view that it was vital that the Intelligence and National Security Alliance, where I'd asked to be the senior advisor through Ellen McCarthy, who was president. So I said, I would really want to form a task force. That task force has turned into a council, a more permanent body. Why? Because we found the problems were really very difficult. We found there were great inefficiencies in the way we did business, that the costs were extremely high, that whether you in government, because the Intelligence and Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act, the Office of Personnel Management in 2005 really took over from the Department of Defense Security Services, most of the responsibility for security clearances. The processes in government did improve because the IRP 2004 did mandate some really expedited processes for clearing the government side. But I found on the contractor side, and we have tens of thousands of contractors, we would not have weapon systems, we would not have payloads in space if we didn't have contractors with great specialties. I found that we found that that was extremely slow and very difficult, and that the government really was moving at glacial speed. Part of the problem was people who had clearances, it was mandated that they have periodic reinvestigations every 5 years. And we had a huge backlog when the Office of Personnel Management took over the responsibility. It had been worked on hard by Jim Clapper, who at that time was the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, but it was improved, government side, but the contractor side. At any given time, we published a paper in December 2011 which said that 10 to 20% of contractors who were to be put on a contract could not work because their PRs, their periodic reinvestigations, were out of date. That cost literally billions of dollars when you think of the vastness of Department of Defense, the intelligence community, and Homeland Security. I found that very staggering. I had one experience where we had a top secret SCI cleared officer from DIA who was born, or he had relatives in Vietnam. He had been polygraphed for counterintelligence. I just wanted to transfer him from DIA to Department of Homeland Security. We waited 9 months to get that clearance passed and approved by the Director of Security over at Homeland Security. That was when I arrived at the Intelligence and National Security Alliance. I had this burning issue. And this burning issue has now turned into a council, a permanent council with subcommittees. And greatly honored that we have both Randy Fort here, who has worked on the technology subcommittee, and we have Doug Thomas, who is working today on a new subcommittee on the insider threat. So it's expanded, it's become permanent, improvements have been made, but we have oceans and oceans of places to go before we have this efficient. Policy and security do not align. Acquisition and security do not align in the way we do our business in government. So that's sort of the background. I wanted to give a little history before we move on here in our discussion.
Okay, thank you, Charlie. And I'd like to turn to Joan, please.
Thanks, Chris. I want to pick up on a couple of things. I certainly agree with the way Randy put the challenges today in context. He's absolutely right. We need a new approach to personnel security inside the government. I also want to pick up and give a couple of examples of what Charlie Allen was talking about. The government, like most successful organizations, has to pay attention to cost, and cost is a big driver. But the cost of personnel security frequently are hidden. The government doesn't know what personnel security cost it. So I have a couple of pretty specific examples I want to give you this morning. And while this story is true, the name was changed to protect, well, me, because it's privacy information. But everything else in the story is true. John Smith is a technical expert in quantum computing. Very hard to find American citizens who are willing to subject themselves to security clearances and work for the government who have these kinds of skills. So he's an expert in quantum computing, cleared at the TS, sensitive compartmented information level within the Department of Defense. And he's projected to be billed to the government at $195,000 annually. Very specialized, skilled individual with a very high clearance. Now that number breaks down to $15,000 per month, $3,750 per week, and $93.75 per hour. Now John is scheduled to move from one intelligence community organization contract to a different organization's contract. And his clearance, remember he's fully cleared, his clearance has been submitted to the gaining agency so that he can be crossed over to work on the new contract. His company will carry the cost of employing John, roughly $15,000 a month, as I said, for this highly skilled, highly educated individual for the duration of the crossover period. Now, who ultimately pays that bill? It's the U.S. government, because that cost is embedded in the rates that the government pays for those individuals. The agency to which John is moving needs only to execute a polygraph to move him. We estimated 6 months for that crossover. Unfortunately, it took 10 months, and we paid the bill $150,000 to keep John on what we called the bench while we waited for his polygraph to be scheduled, which it was, but we didn't know during that time whether or not it would be. So that's a huge cost of one individual. And that was a fairly simple process. The second one's a little harder. We had an individual who was also cleared TS, sensitive compartmented information, with a polygraph, but who was married to a foreign national. His wife was Indian. He was in an advanced technology office in DOD, and we wanted to move him to an IC, advanced technology office. Now, he had a Bachelor's of Science in Electrical Engineering from the California Institute of Technology and a PhD in Applied and Engineering Physics from Cornell University. Aren't a whole lot of American citizens that have those qualifications. He was also the author of more than 40 technical papers with over 5,000 citations. His clearance, he was fully cleared, took 294 days to cross over because he had an Indian-born wife. She got American citizenship before his clearance crossed over, and she started the process after we submitted his paperwork. These are two individuals out of the thousands of contractors who do highly specialized, highly skilled information for the intelligence community. We have to fix this problem. With that, I'll turn it back over to Chris.
Thanks, Joan. And Doug.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning. One thing we're going to see is a common theme from this panel, and that is that we need to start leveraging technology, for sure. I think one of the things that has changed is the threat environment has changed dramatically in the 50 years. And somebody mentioned earlier the OPM breach. That's kind of a big deal. That sends shivers up my spine because this is more about sophistication in human approaches and sophisticated in spear phishing. The bad guys now have much more information at their fingertips than they ever had before. So it's going to make our job a lot harder. I look at this panel, it's no offense to anybody, but it's decades of experience in the government looking at this problem set. And I think all of us could be probably a little bit embarrassed with why we are or where we are today. Because as Randy said, and as Joan said, and Charlie said, we've been approaching this problem set, clearance reform, for 50 years now. And it is time to start leveraging technology on the front end when you get a clearance and throughout the whole process of somebody having a clearance.
Okay, thanks, Doug. And I'll just finish up with just a few points as to why we need reform. A secret clearance costs $400. A top secret security clearance costs $5,000. The direct costs of security clearances in any given year are $1.6 billion. That's a lot of money. We do hundreds of thousands of clearances each year. Now, if we use technology, yes, there will be a cost up front, but the cost of doing those clearances and monitoring people going forward is, what's the cost of a bank transaction? It's a tiny fraction of a cent. That's the model we need to move to. Okay, so let's start the next round, and I want to turn it right back to Doug. What changes do we have to make? Doug is in the middle of making them, so he is our speaker to start.
Okay. So I'm trying to remain optimistic. Following the OPM breach, there was a 90-day review study that was stood up, and the principals are being briefed on that this week. I'm hearing that they're going to stand up a new agency called the National Investigative Service Agency, and it's not sure where it's going to land yet. So it's going to have a new director, it's going to have a new focus. So I'm trying to remain optimistic about that. But what really needs to happen is, like I mentioned earlier, on the front end, we probably need something before we hire somebody relative to like what the insurance companies do and what the credit card companies do, give a risk score on somebody. But then don't stop there. I think what you need to have is continuous evaluation of the people that you grant a clearance to, who by virtue of that has access to our keys to the kingdom. It is not that hard. We've been doing it in our organization for the last 2 years. And quite frankly, some people might get concerned about the costs up front. They're not that big of a deal. But the money you save over time with continuous evaluation 24/7 on your employee population is phenomenal.
Okay. Why don't we turn to Randy?
Well, I think, first of all, let's acknowledge just the government just needs to, it's like going to AA or something. You need to acknowledge you have a problem. So the problem is this terribly obsolete system, which simply is ineffective. The second thing is to make a clear decision that we are going to move forward with a technology platform to solve this problem. The numbers that are being used here, hundreds of thousands of this, or there's a million, I don't know, something like maybe a total of 10 million people, government and contractor, have some form of clearance. I've heard that number, that's a ballpark. But when you go to the private sector, that's a small number. 10 million is not a big number. If you're Visa, if you're American Express, if you're MasterCard, if you're an insurance company, if you're anybody out there, if you're Amazon, if you're Google, 10 million, if you were to actually use some of their systems, they would probably have to dumb it down to get to a number as small as 10 million. So this is something where there is a lot of technology that is available. We are hearing about these days, weeks, months, in some cases years to get these issues done. Security clearances should take a fraction of a second. Literally. How long does it take when you take your Visa card and you swipe it at a point of purchase? Do you stand there for 298 days and wait for a green signal to come back? No. It comes back literally in the blink of an eye, because those databases are being queried by very sophisticated algorithms that are doing a lot of data correlation literally in fractions of a second. So all this issue of crossover, of periodic review, of the delay, of all these things, if security clearances took 1 second, and if they cost 1 cent, then we could all get security clearances dozens and dozens of times a day, because it wouldn't matter. We have to figure out how to use the technology to disintermediate, to change the fundamental nature of the way these processes go forth. And I think that if we can do that, yes, there will be upfront costs. There always is. Uber had to pay a certain upfront cost to come up with that IT layer to be able to send out automobiles, and all of the other technology companies have to do that. That's an investment. The $1.6 billion that Chris mentioned, I'm betting that's off by an order of magnitude. You know why? Because it doesn't count for the delay and the downtime of all those people out there that are sitting twiddling their thumbs waiting for their clearances to come through. And that is billions and billions of dollars that are being wasted. The time value of money is never calculated in this. So I think moving to a complete digital platform, and yes, there will always be 2-3% of the individual cases that will require some hands-on treatment. Somebody went off and, lived in an ashram in Tibet for, 18 months when they were 22 years old, and that'll take a little bit extra care and attention. But the vast majority of the population we're talking about could be done using an all-digital modern technology that would give you a considerably greater insight into the behavior and the future behavior, since these algorithms are becoming predictable. I mean, Google knows if you're getting sick before you know you're getting sick. Target knows you're pregnant before you know you're pregnant. The telcos know where you're going to be tomorrow based on where you are today. That's today's technology, which, again, will just be doubling every 12 to 24 months as we move forward. So these capabilities will become increasingly predictive. We'll be able to flag the Snowdens and the Mannings early on when they start to go off the rails, not after they've taken the train over the gorge and completely, annihilated it. So we'll actually end up with a much more secure outcome and security dividend once these things are actually implemented.
Okay, thanks, Randy. Joan.
Thanks, Chris. I agree with the way Randy characterized this. Every director of national intelligence has come in with an agenda to improve personnel security. And a lot of them have spent time and effort and money trying to do it. We've had a lot of reform initiatives. But I think what we never come to grips with is we see security as really a supporting function. We don't see it as inimical to getting our jobs done or allowing us to get the jobs done if it's done correctly. And if we treated personnel security as a mission rather than as an administrative function that we have to deal with, then I think we would be able to spend the money and solve the problem. We are pretty good at solving mission problems in the IC, but because we don't think of it as something that either hinders or helps our mission, we don't treat it with the same seriousness as we do mission issues. And so I think that philosophical issue really affects us in our ability to deal with this problem.
Okay, thanks, Joan. Charlie.
Yes, I just want to reinforce what's been said by other colleagues here. We are in a new era. We have new technologies. Continuous monitoring is something that the Director of National Intelligence supports. Certain agencies like CIA and NSA are moving ahead in that realm, as well as others in the intelligence community, and the Department of Defense, of course, which has a very vast population of people who hold clearances, whether secret or top secret. But the progress is quite slow. I think we have to align the policy level as well as the security levels, as well as the contracting, because today it's segmented and separated, and the security officer for a chief information security officer that monitors network seems far removed from some of the very rapid and more efficient ways we can do this. And I trust Doug in his judgment that a new independent or essentially independent agency will be stood up to replace what the Office of Personnel Management did. The Office of Personnel Management did not have the infrastructure or capabilities or the resources, I think, when this was decided back in 2004 and DOD handed this responsibility in 2005 to OPM to execute this. They did not have the security. They did not have the counterintelligence expertise to handle the problems we face today. I think that's a given. It is my strong belief, however, that we have an opportunity now not to build in, if there is an independent agency or a semi-independent agency, all the vulnerabilities of the past, where policy, security, and the whole practical business of doing security clearances seem to be separated and divided. They have to be a unified way. In 2008, there was a Performance Accountability Board established. And under this administration, there's been continuing efforts to find efficiencies. But generally, as we have seen from the Snowden, from the Manning events, and the Davis events at the Navy Yard, we've not been very successful in doing all this. I think right now I'm undergoing update of my top secret SCI clearance. I had to fill out, an SF-86 with the help of a special assistant who understands all the technology to fill the darn thing out.
That's 127 pages, by the way.
And I thought you would think, since I was investigated by CIA many times, starting in 1957, that perhaps I could have a shortened form, but no, I had to do the entire thing again, and I'm sure that someone will interview me and will read back to me the 120-odd pages to me, and with each question say, you know, is this correct or is this incorrect? That seems to me very obsolete. Neighborhood checks seem very obsolete because we are a very mobile society, particularly in Washington. You don't know your neighbors the way you used to know the neighborhoods as we once did. There are many efficiencies that technology can bring to this. It requires a little bit of risk management, but it does take a unification between the security gurus and the policy decision makers. Let's hope we'll have embarked on a new generation of way of doing security clearance reform.
Okay, thank you, Charlie. And let me just round out a little talking about the process of security reinvestigations. So once you get a clearance, you're supposed to be reinvestigated every 5 years if you have a top secret clearance, every 10 if you have a secret. And that's just not very effective because people's behavior changes over time. Even if you were clean as a whistle on the day of your security clearance, things happen to people over time. There are changes in relationships, drugs, alcohol, personality changes, and in our current system, there's really no way, unless you happen to come upon that 5th or 10th year anniversary, of checking on people. The system of continuous evaluation enables you to identify problem employees. And frankly, most of them are not going to be spies. Most of them are going to be people who have trouble in their personal lives that will affect workplace performance and indeed will leave them vulnerable to potential intelligence operations by hostile powers. But the point here is with a continuous evaluation system, we can do much better by our employees. We can identify their problems through improved human resources, give them the help and services they need to get good employees back on track so that they're productive and that we help protect our people. By protecting the people, we can protect our secrets far better than we do today. Okay, let's move on to the next round of questions, and that would be what has to happen in order for these ideas to be successfully implemented by all parties? Who'd like to start on that?
I guess I can go because
Thanks,
mine
Doug.
are very simple. I think the designation of an organization that understands this mission set and how important it is, securing the network, pretty critical, enhancing technology, and aggressively pursuing continuous evaluation throughout the entire process. I mean, those are, to me, the 4 basic tenets to keep this thing alive and well.
Okay, thanks, Doug. Randy?
Yeah, you know, when I look at this issue, we're not trying to find a cure for cancer. We're not trying to solve peace in the Middle East. This is not a DARPA hard problem. There are plenty of examples and plenty of exemplars that exist in the private sector today, right this minute, that would solve 99% of this problem, which is what makes it so maddening when Charlie has been leading this effort, where he says for now more than half a decade, and I've been contributing, and Doug, and there's some others in the audience here that have participated in this. We have the solution set out there. Doug has created an extraordinary program at Lockheed Martin on continuous evaluation and continuous monitoring. They have gone through all the hoops. They've had all the lawyers in the world look at it. They have figured out how to handle the privacy issues. They have looked at the key technologies that are involved, and they've come up with an effective mechanism. If the U.S. government just went and took the Lockheed model and implemented it, we would be orders of magnitude more secure today than we were yesterday. So, and there are a lot of other companies. Credit card companies have been doing this for decades. Insurance companies have been doing this for decades. Financial institutions have been doing this for decades. This is not you know, gee, we have to figure out how to get to the moon. No, this is just, we need to go copy what people who know what they're doing and copy effectively. And I think there'd be a lot of companies that would be willing to do that. So what's the critical need? In my view, it's simple, it's leadership. We've got to get senior leaders involved in this and make this not priority number 17.1.4.A, but, you know, in the top 2 or 3 things that they're going to do for all the reasons that we're talking about. And I think what Chris just said, our people, if we really do believe people are our most important asset, and I happen to believe that, then coming up with a system that will better protect our people from the kinds of challenges and threats that are being directed against them in the 21st century. And if somebody does have an issue, to identify that early on before they go badly off the rails, to get a good person back on track and keep them on track, and to keep that value so that we don't have to go through, you know, in the worst case of Snowden, where we spend years and billions of dollars doing damage assessments and having to go change systems, but at the very least taking adverse action against somebody, trying to fire them, and all the time and energy we burn up doing that, then if only because this would better protect and better serve the people that are working in these agencies and in these organizations, that to me is the best reason to go forward with this system, and to do so with alacrity.
Oh, thanks, Randy. Charlie?
I just want to reinforce what both Doug and Randy have said. It's a matter now of getting policy. It's business processes, I think, as Joan said when we were meeting prior to this formal session. We have to improve our business processes, much of it is, but the policy side, the security side, the contracting side, all has to come together in a more unified way, and there has to be strong, great leadership. It's going to take leadership in intelligence. It's going to take leadership in this administration and the new administration coming in January 17 to really begin to change this and to change it dramatically and do the risk management that's required. I have been investigated many times, but I agree with Chris Kojum. You have to always, you know, do the checks on people when they are updated, and periodic updates are absolutely needed. One of the things that we've been asked to do in the Security Policy Reform Council was to get some metrics to demonstrate that certain crossovers of, particularly I'm talking about contractors, that it differs widely among the agency. And the metrics we have achieved, we anonymized it, we have a number of companies participating, including people sitting on this panel. Companies have participated very fully. Some agencies can do crossovers very quickly, one in particular. Others, surprisingly, some of the agencies that you would think doing crossovers would do it in a hurry, and it drags on, not just days, but sometimes months. That is hard for me to comprehend. So continuous leveraging the technology, changing the policies, updating the policies, and when you're being updated for about the 15th time, finds ways to focus on what may have changed in me or other individuals that would be an issue of concern. Let's not go back and figure out when our parents were born and when they died. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Charlie. Joan?
Chris, there's really nothing more to add to that. I think everybody has captured this perfectly. In my opinion, this is not about reform. This is about a fundamental change, a recognition that security, particularly personnel security, is essential to accomplishing the nation's security. We can do this. It's not as hard as the many years of trying would indicate. But I think if we treat it as a mission challenge and a mission problem, we can solve this problem.
Okay, thanks, Joan. The one aspect that I think I'd like to speak to on how to successfully implement, of course, the questions of privacy and civil liberties always arise, and they should. They're important. I guess I would speak to them as follows, that when you have a background check and apply for a security clearance, you agree to have your background investigated. What we're proposing here is simply to update the nature of that background investigation to the 21st century. So instead of 127 pages of forms, listing your dead relatives, submitting your neighbors and colleagues to background interviews, that we move to a digital background investigation. And it can and should be only publicly available data. And there are a lot of data sets out there that are publicly available. The government should not, in this endeavor, in my view at any rate, look to data records that are other than those that are available to the public at large. But the power of assembling and integrating and analyzing those with algorithms is a very powerful tool for evaluating people, both when they first get their clearance and to evaluate them continuously as employees thereafter. On that score, you know, Amazon knows more about you, Google knows more about you, and knowing how political campaigns work, the Republican National Committee and the Democratic National Committee, and very sophisticated databases looking at voters, they know an awful lot about you. I would submit that those who are entrusted with our nation's secrets should be analyzed with those same public data sets, and that we can do a much, much better job of protecting our secrets and protecting our people who protect our secrets. So any other comments from the panel here before we open it up?
I would just add to
Please,
what
Randy.
you just said, Chris, that publicly available information, but also information that people willingly decide to disclose or access when they're using their business computer systems. It would be at government or private sector if you're a contractor. Once you log on from, you know, .gov or .com, if it's your company, you have no expectation of privacy in that regard. And a few years ago, one of the true heroes, I think, in the security reform area, a woman named Trish Stokes of the U.S. Army, managed to get a pilot project undertaken where they would look at a subset of the overall population of cleared people in the Army. And they went and looked at their online behavior using their army.mil internet address. So once you do that, if you're logging on to Facebook from army.mil, if you're logging on to some other personal account, all bets are off. You have no expectation of privacy. So they had about 10,000 or so, and it was a mix of secret and top secret cleared people. And I'm not going to get the numbers exactly right, but the order of magnitude was on the order of 125 people who were otherwise perfectly within bounds of all the security. They were within their 5 years. They were all, you know, good to go, were instantly suspended because they found serious violations of security policy. There were just a couple that stick in my mind. One, a guy was looking online to find a hitman to kill his wife from his army.mil address. True story. Another guy was bragging, hey, I just passed my urinalysis test. Where can I go score some pot? I want to get high tonight. So, you know, there was an issue. 125 people instantly suspended from access because they took a look at what was going on digitally that they had never looked at before. And that was just one tiny example, 10,000 out of the 10 million people we're talking about. So these tools are very powerful. That was a couple of years ago. And I think if we leverage this technology, we're going to get even more insight than we've ever had before. And yes, absolutely, the privacy and those issues have to be resolved. But I think in the example of what Doug has done, they have successfully resolved that. There are other examples of companies and institutions that have figured out how to do so in a way that is respectful of individual privacy. And as anybody that's ever been, especially those of us who've served in government, and I've spent half my time in my career there, you sign those documents. There's a 2 or 3 page, very tiny number 5 type list of all the things that you're waiving and you're giving permission for the government to do. And as Chris said, now we're just taking that into the 21st century. Instead of that being paper and pencil, it'll be a digital investigation going forward, and therefore be that much more effective.
Okay, first question for President Jane Harman.
Thank you, Michael. Very good discussion by all of you. And I want to add to your to-do list fixing the paper time card problem at the Wilson Center. It's beyond embarrassing. 4.5 years into this job, I have failed. My question is, my comment is, there was very little mention of my former employer, the United States Congress, who employed you too, Chris, and maybe others of you, fortunate people. How much does Congress need to do or how little can Congress do and still have this transition occur?
Oh, thanks. That's a great question. Congress can play its very important role of helping to set the agenda. If someone on the right committee in Congress makes this a priority, holds hearings, drafts legislation to create a 21st century technology platform for clearances, it will drive the process. The problem that you've pointed to here is that there has been too little public discussion. There has been no public debate on this topic. And that is why we've not had change. Inertia has brought us to 2015. I believe that public discussion and strong congressional interest can help drive change.
Well, public discussion starts right here at the Wilson Center.
Let me call on John Gannon.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. Terrific discussion, and great to see you all. You're all aging gracefully. I think a number of you made the point that the intelligence community overall has been behind the technology curve for at least 50 years. I buy that. You've also said that with regard to the issues associated with security clearances, we've known about these for at least 30 years. And I would say at least 20 years, I know that some of the issues that you raised about the cost, both the financial cost, but also the cost of the loss of expertise the intelligence community needs. We were working on those 25, 30 years ago also. Having spent 14 months with the FBI recently, the point I would make to you is I think to some degree we have slipped back from where we were 15 or 20 years ago. Partly it is because I think you're dealing with the very strong headwinds that come out of the WikiLeaks and the Snowden revelations. Because my observation, I was surprised to learn, for example, that the agencies don't accept each other's security clearance processes. And what I see is that adds to the cost, because you get a polygraph and a clearance at the FBI, and then DIA won't accept it. So when you actually go into the intelligence community, into the government, the very enlightened views that you have been expressing here, which I totally agree, and boy, would I love to see the end state that you're describing with regard to the alignment of the intelligence community with the digital world, but I just don't see it. I think we've gone back, and I think at the congressional level, I think there is a reluctance to deal with these issues or to spend any money that's going to fix them. I see at the administration level not enough concern to pick up the issue and run with it. And within the intelligence community itself, I think, Randy, you made the point, and I think very well, that the inefficiencies in the current system, the inaccuracies in the current system represent a heavy cost. But what happens to the leaders, and the leaders are critical to all this, is when they get into power, the security system is able to convince them that while there are inefficiencies, what we do discover in the current processes do protect us, and it is not worth the risk of changing. So I think if you're going to get anywhere on this, there's got to be an alignment of leadership between the intelligence community, the White House, and the Congress. There's got to be a coalition of the willing that will pick all this up, because I think Congress is critical in this. Congress is not really picking up this issue. Neither is the Congress. But I think most critically, the leaders of the intelligence community are not buying into the fundamental change that is necessary and that you have described so well.
Okay, Charlie,
Yeah,
please.
I'd just like to respond a little bit to what John had to say, because I think he's really spot on and historically correct. In some respect, we've lost ground as a digital revolution that Randy described so well accelerates. We have moved at glacial speed in many respects in modernizing our processes, our policies, and particularly our security processes. And we've spent about 3 years trying to decide, it took 3 years, I believe, from about 2011 to 14 to get suitability requirements defined by the administration. I could be wrong on the dates, but it took a long time to just determine some fairly elementary stuff. So we're working at parts of it, and we're working very hard and very laboriously. But as far as you're talking about, the big unity between the intelligence, homeland security, defense communities, the administration, and the Congress is really lacking. As the chair of the Security Policy Reform Council, we get interest from Democratic staffers, Republican staffers occasionally, but very little leadership on this issue in the Homeland Security committees, Senate or House, or in the Armed Services Committee. There was a lot after the Snowden events. There was a lot of, and after the OPM breach, there's a lot of politics. The administration a bit defensive, Republicans in the administration very critical, but then it passed. Here we have this major storm, this major thing that we all are concerned about. My wife just got her letter from OPM on Friday, you know, because it has personal identifiable information about her, but I had to put in my SF-86. So we are moving, again, very slowly. The unity of effort on it, nonpartisan, crossing the aisle that Jane talks about so strongly, is lacking.
Yeah, I would add, John, I agree with you. I think you're absolutely right. The other area where we have similar dysfunction inside the government and that affects the contractor world as well as the missions is on the acquisition side. And both security and acquisition are very rules-based processes and environments in the government. And those rules have evolved over 50 or 60 years. It's very hard to get off of that kind of rules-based approach to these very challenging but very important functions that the government needs done. I agree with you 100%, but I have seen it backfire so many times when we've tried to get both bipartisan and bicameral and all parts of the government working together. You begin to despair that we can actually do this.
I'd like to add one thing to John's comments because I thought they were very good. When you talk about entities that need to resolve this, you talked about Congress, you talked about the White House and the intelligence community. I would throw into the private sector as well. I mean, you would be very surprised how far along some of the companies are with regards to resolving this problem set.
Yes, as my chief lawyer reminds me often, the Fourth Amendment applies to the government's involvement with its citizenry, not with my employer's involvement with me. So there are things that we can do in the private sector that actually move this problem further down the road.
Okay, we'll take a question in the back and then come back up front. So, sir, with the blue tie.
Great, thank you.
Mike
Pesner with Senator Warner's office. Thank you very much. Very important discussion and obviously a topic of great concern, especially both regarding the loss of productivity, taxpayer dollars in terms of the lack of clearance reciprocity, but also, as we saw after OPM with the security clearance process. If I could maybe defend Congress a little bit. So Senator Warner sits on the Intelligence Committee. 2 years ago, the Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal 2014 had a whole section, Title V of our authorization legislation that required the DNI to conduct and ensure that continuous monitoring takes place within the IC and to report on clearance reciprocity. And so that was passed into law almost 2 years ago. I wonder if, so it's clearly an item of concern on the Hill, maybe not as publicly, but I wonder if maybe part of the problem is akin to cybersecurity, where, especially in the private sector, we've seen cybersecurity relegated to the realm of the chief information officer and not the CEO, which is fine until there's a breach which causes the loss of personal data for hundreds of, tens of thousands of people, and then the CEO has to resign. And so maybe that's, I don't know what else it might take to get that level of prominence, because clearly we've had the breaches with Snowden and OPM, As you point out, as far back as 2011, INSA has talked about the costs. And maybe it's this new agency. I somehow, personally don't hold a lot of hope for it, but maybe that's the first step, because there has been this bifurcation between the intelligence community, the DoD, and then the OPM and the private sector on this as well. So any ideas of what concretely Congress can do, I think, are very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Comment?
Well, I think it's clearly Congress has made made their views known on this. Unfortunately, I think there's maybe needs to be an additional amendment to the next authorization that says by date certain, and choose a date. I think it could be done. Well, as in the private sector, it could be done in 6 months, but we're talking government, so let's say 3 years, just to allow for the usual kind of fudge time. But by January 1 of 2018, the intelligence community shall employ a fully digital, fully automated, secure background investigation system for all security clearances for U.S. government and for related contractors. Period. Something along those lines. Where now you're this new agency. If this is what it's going to be, NISA, or if it's DNI or whomever. I got to start in January 1 of 2018 and start walking this back. What do I need to do today to get to that point? And that will, the old saying, if you're going to be hanged in a fortnight, it concentrates the mind wonderfully. Well, if there's a hanging date, by date certain, the minds will become concentrated, and you might see, and also if there's a date certain, then the oversight committees now can, on all the routine hearings. So, Mr. Director, how's it going on that deadline? You've only got X number of days, weeks, months, years. Anything we can do to help? Do you need, how's it going? And that would keep the focus and attention on this. So I think without some, look, I hate that. I don't like to see Congress have to be that micromanagement in anything. I think the executive branch should use their own authorities and responsibilities to reach these conclusions, and just do this because it's the right thing to do. It makes sense for all the reasons we've talked about. But it doesn't seem to be Charlie's talked about risk management a number of times. One of the iron laws of bureaucracy is risk aversion. I mean, they'll keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, whether it's 10 years or 100 years obsolete, until somebody tells them not to, because it's safer to keep doing the thing that's always been done. So it'll take some leadership, and I think probably some outside influence by the likes of the oversight committees to be able to really be the action-forcing event.
Charlie.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Michael, thank you very much, because we recall the legislation by the SISI, and its authorization bill, and that did help prompt and move things along. Our Director of National Intelligence, Jim Clapper, is very much believes strongly in continuous monitoring, and various projects and processes and pilot efforts underway. We've still not moved fast enough, and I'm sure Director Clapper would agree with that. But at the same time, the INSA, the Intelligence National Security Alliance, we're planning a spring event where we would like to have Senator Warner come speak again about the importance of this. So the incoming President, Chuck Alsop, will be in touch with you and with the Senator. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. A question up front here.
Well, Charlie, my wife got her Christmas card from OPM on Friday as well. There's a lot of frustration amongst all of us about how slow and how glacial this process is, even with its importance. Yet, in the aftermath of the OPM breach, which is probably a watershed moment, within a week, we had awarded a $300 million contract to do something that I think was really pretty stupid. And we're now all having our credit checked as if our SF-86 was the key to getting a new credit card. So, I mean, it's not that we can't act in emergencies. I think we choose not to act. And I wonder if you could talk about the divergence of those two actions.
My guess is every one of us got our OPM letter, since we all had government experience. Doug, you probably have the most insight into this.
Yeah, John, that's a good point. Shortly after the OPM breach happened, a couple of us wrote an op-ed, and Charlie put it out, and it had to do with what we were reading from the Hill and the media. The focus seemed to be much more on identity theft relative to the OPM breach, and I will tell you that breach had nothing to do with identity theft. I mean, if it happens, I'll be a little bit surprised, but it had everything to do with a nation state having the most granular information on everybody with the clearance. And my concern with that is, like I mentioned before, the sophistication, spearfishing and the sophistication of human approaches. But this is a 30-year problem. So keeping people interested and excited about this breach being a 30-year problem is going to be somewhat difficult, but that's exactly what this is.
Please, ma'am, here.
Hi, I'm Elaine Middleman, attorney, and first of all, I have to mention Lee Hamilton because, sorry, I'm from Southern Indiana, and I've known him really my whole life, and he's very close friends with my parents, and I sent him an email to congratulate him, so that was a very important event, and I know he was pleased to be named Presidential Medal of Freedom, so we should all congratulate him for that, and I'm sure you all miss him here too. Anyway, I'm happy to be here today. I'm a victim of the OPM process. I'll be very brief, but I testified some years ago before Congressman Don Edwards and Jerry Sikorsky's subcommittees about due process for security clearances. And OPM did a background investigation on me, and I did not get denied a security clearance, but they just simply stopped the process in midstream. So they created this file, which Congressman Edwards held up at the hearing, which contained really obnoxious and false information. And I never got the chance to rebut it, and I was in court. So I'm saying the system has never worked. And questions like, are you a loyal American or whatever, I mean, they never said I was disloyal. I had other so-called faults, and I have information. What that was in my file was false, but I never had any opportunity to comment. They did not interview me. They just simply stopped in midstream. And so the process has never worked. And I mean, I think the people that it didn't work for, as I was telling someone earlier today, are the people that are the terrorists or Snowdens or something. But somebody like me, it didn't work for me either. And I said, what kind of a system is it where I'm considered a security risk? This is a non-functioning system. And the costs are just astronomical, as you've all pointed out, in terms of human capital expenditures, time, cost of money, et cetera. So I would really like to participate in, because I think I could put a face on what's wrong with this system. It just simply does not work. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for your comment. Let's see, over here on the left, then we'll go in the back on the right.
Thank you. My name's Larry Chergino. I'm just a beneficiary of the system in a ex-defense intelligence community participant. My thought is focused on what many of you have mentioned here in some of the illustrations with marijuana and the rest. It's the implication of how much risk we're willing to bear as we move to this automated process. I understand that this is a wonderful notion that will drive policy changes as we go forward. Embedded in those algorithms that people have talked about are the notion of risk. And there's a lot of studies by Perserec and other functionaries in this business that deal with the issues of trust. But I don't hear in your discussion here much notion of how the really, I would call them ultra-conservative counterintelligence community people embed risk in this system, and how to overcome that as you drive it forward with automation.
Okay, thanks. I think, Doug, would you like to speak to that?
Sure. I think that's a good question about risk. So standing up a program in industry is not that much different, I found, in standing up a program like this in your non-IC agencies, your non-Title 50 agencies. They all have very strong privacy concerns. What we did in our company is we stood up a program locked step with the lawyers and the privacy side, locked step with ethics and HR and corporate information security, because it's a team sport. It's not a security issue, it's a team sport. We put privacy at the top of that issue. We put governance at the top of that issue. And what our program does, it looks at behavior. It doesn't do any profiling of people at all. It profiles behavior. It looks at the digital behavior, and it looks at a human behavior baseline behavior. And together we make a decision on whether or not we're going to act on that or not. If you think about the data in our tool, it's all objective data. There's nothing subjective about the data in the tool, and it is all publicly available information. The subjectiveness of the tool are the red flags or triggers you come up with, the weights you assign to that, and then what do you do with that information. And the folks that we've hired in our company is we are trying to very much look out for the employee as opposed to just looking out for badness. If you think about problem sets, insider threat, suicide ideations, workplace violence, they all have concerning or anomalous behavior that's going on in somebody's life. So the program we've developed, we're looking out for that kind of behavior that's atypical in someone's life for us to perhaps act on.
Can we transfer that thought process to the government?
Well, sure, but I think we come back to leadership. Left to its own devices, security. We talk about risk management. The amount of risk that any security establishment will ever accept, whether it's counterintelligence or just the personnel security, is zero. Every single time, zero. They want zero risk. There can be no compromise. And as has been pointed out too often, the leadership, the executive leadership in the intelligence community and in the government has just basically sort of listened to that, well, we don't want to spy. Well, if you go to the NCIX headquarters and you look at the little rogue hall of fame on their wall, there's been scores of spies. The system has never worked 100%. So there have always been failures. There's always been spies. There's always been thieves. There's always been, aberrant behavior that's gone on in this current system. So to use that as an excuse not to do something going forward is truly, literally ridiculous. And yet the executive leadership defers. So if you're going to have real risk management, and make real decisions about risk trade-off, that has to be, in the private sector, we'd call a C-suite, a senior executive level kind of decision. That's got to be the XCOM with the DNI sitting there and all the agency heads sitting around that table. I used to attend those meetings in Charlie once a month and put that issue on the table. And what are we going to accept? We can't have zero risk, but we obviously don't want to have 100% vulnerability. So what are we willing to accept? How can this technology, these new digital technologies, allow us to have better insight into behavior and patterns of behavior and so on and so forth, and figure out where we want to set the various standards for these things, and then make a decision. Work with the Congress. Don't just sort of do this haphazardly, but go to the Hill. Here's what we've decided. What do you think? It's not going to be 100%. Yes, some people are going to slip through the net, but there have always been people that have slipped through the net. Witness, Snowden, Manning, Nicholson, Ames, right on down the list, Hansen, and so on and so on and so on. So, but we think this system, net will end up, because of all the benefits we've talked about, but will also give us truly more security at the end of the day. Get everybody to buy into that, and then move the system forward, and we'll learn. And I'm sure as Doug and their system has learned, you do a little tweak here, you need to move this indicator up, that one's not so important, you move it down, and you get on with the new process.
Okay. Other comment?
Yes, I'd just like to say if we do leverage these emerging technologies, I believe we'll see a change not only in business and policy efforts, and you talk about the ultra-conservative counterintelligence, that person, he or she, has a real responsibility. But I believe that, and I know that current people prominent in counterintelligence in the agencies of the intelligence community welcome this as a way to do better risk management. There is more enlightenment among counterintelligence experts. Yeah, they have to be hard-nosed, whether it's the Bureau or CIA or in defense, but I do believe that this gives us hope for the kind of change that you want.
Just one comment on the question, and that is we have to ensure here that we are not parochial. It is not only in the United States of America where people are engaged in this question. I can assure you that hostile services are looking at digital evaluation tools of key U.S. government employees, and I think it's really important that we act to protect our people first before other people take action.
Chris, that's a very good point. In fact, one of the INSA white paper that we put out a couple of years ago now pointed out that even if the intelligence community, security community, and counterintelligence community didn't believe a single word we had to say about these digital tools and technology, the rest of the world did. And so unless you wanted the rest of the world using all these technologies against our people, and they will, then you better understand them enough to be able to protect our people from the attacks of the Chinese and the Russians and, you know, the Iranians, and fill in the blank. Just about everybody out there is always looking to try to penetrate or otherwise do harm to the U.S. government. So if only on those grounds, that should be predicate enough to want to move forward on this.
Okay, there's a woman in the back, please. Yeah.
I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what continuous monitoring is and how it works at Lockheed, and also how the employees are trained to, or how they're told that their data is being used, what kind of publicly available data you're using, and how the employees are trained about it.
Sure. I look at more of a continuous evaluation as opposed to continuous monitoring, although that does go on as well. But the program I was asked to stand up across Lockheed Martin was to stand up a counterintelligence and insider threat detection program across the enterprise. Can't do that with a handful of people. Got to leverage technology for that. One of the things we did once we built our tool is we went out with a very robust communications campaign to inform the employee population why we need something like this in our company, okay, because we build national security, right? The government should have an expectation that the product we're providing them hasn't been compromised already and countermeasures built to defeat it. So it's really for their benefit that we have a program along these lines. One of the things that we didn't do is we didn't use the word report. Okay, we didn't want our employees reporting to us. We wanted our employees to be engaged, because what you don't want is you don't want to create a culture of snitches. You want employees to buy into this program for their benefit, for the company's benefit, and for national security's benefit. As far as the type of information we are bringing into the tool, some of it has to do with this suite of tools we have on our network. So we have a digital baseline of each employee, and some of it is human behavior baseline. So it's the type of stuff that we already collect within the company. It's existing data within the company. And then publicly available information, I mean, it could be arrest, it could be liens, it could be bankruptcy, those kinds of things. But it's all publicly available information. I think selling this internal to Lockheed Martin was a little bit of a long pole in the tent, quite frankly. Building a program that's legally sound and regulatory sound, quite frankly, it's fairly easy. Is it in line with your corporate values is a bigger question you have to answer. And what we've done is we've built a program along those lines because we have such a strict governance process.
Okay. Got three people here. The gentleman here, the gentleman there, and then the lady up front. So. Up here. Up here.
Thank you. Maurizio Geri, Italian PhD candidate at ODU, Norfolk, Virginia. I'm waiting for a security clearance, but not from your government, from my government in Italy. And I will work for NATO next year, hopefully when it will arrive. It was not 126 pages, only 5 pages, I have to fill. I don't know how it works, but my question is, what is the kind of collaboration between US government and foreign governments or military organizations like NATO? Because maybe there are best practices, not overcrossing, but some kind of overlapping between, you know, countries that collaborate, at least in this military organization. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
I regret to say I'm really not an expert. I mean, there are NATO, there's, you know, classified information with NATO, but I've not had the experience of looking at the security practice. I know the UK in particular and some of our close intelligence partner countries have similar systems that have been on sort of along the same lines, the vetting process, as the Brits, I believe, call it. But how much technology they have introduced, that's not something that we've looked at. I guess we've just been so focused on trying to drag, you know, our own our own process into the 21st century, that we have not done that benchmarking, but that's actually an interesting idea to go and check with NATO allies and some of the other countries with whom we have close, Japan and Australia and so forth, that we have close relationships, and see how they do business and maybe learn something from them as well.
I think your question stunned us because you said you only had a 5-page paper you had to do.
Okay, sir, over here, and then the lady in front.
Hi, my name's Hugh McElrath. I'm a retired intelligence officer. I get it about the digital continuous monitoring. What I'm interested in, and I have heard some allusions to it, is will we have more nuance in the adjudication of the information that's turned up? We have this vision that the adjudicator is this sort of straight-laced Presbyterian, and he doesn't understand why you would be interested in vacationing in the former Soviet Union, or if you're have an avocation as an exotic dancer on the side. Or in my last job, I was trying to clear a hijab-wearing Muslim woman PhD mathematician. I think I retired before she ever came on board, if she ever did. Can you address that?
That's a great question. Charlie.
Yeah, I know that we have those kinds of examples, but having done a classified study for one agency on their processes, for their security clearance processes, and including their adjudication and all the other aspects of, it was one I did pro bono over a period of about a year. I found the adjudication process is very nuanced, very enlightened. It's not a Calvinist making some predestined decision whatsoever. It's very sophisticated, and at all agencies it has to be a senior officer that does the final decision on the adjudication. It's not, they don't accept what your neighbor or your so-called friend who doesn't really like you has said during the interview process. It's sophisticated and very mature, and I went away very pleased and surprised by what I saw. It was well done and very mature.
I would just add, I think the technology, first of all, you can set the parameters any way you want. I think one of the advantages of using a digital model is that we will be able to take in so many more types of, it's a big data set out there for a group or for an individual. So we'll be able to look and have a much richer basis of data upon which to make decisions about people. But we'll also be able to set up basically individual norms for anybody that has an intelligence community access or holds a clearance. Your norm is different from my norm. You show up at a certain time, you do certain things online, you leave at a certain time, your travel, your expenditures, your behavior, and so on and so forth is unique to you. Mine is unique to me. Everyone has their own unique footprint or signature or however we want to characterize it. So when there's a deviation from that norm, if you suddenly are showing up at 2 o'clock on a Saturday night, 2 a.m. on a Saturday night, Sunday morning, when you never have before, bing, a light goes off, and why is that? Well, maybe there was a crisis in your area, you got called in, and so it's it's perfectly okay, or maybe your supervisor or anybody, I don't know why he's in there, it's never happened before, there's no good reason for that. Well, maybe we better take a focus. So that's a very notional kind of situation, but I think the issue, you can build the adjudication into the algorithms as long as somebody is behaving within norms, and then it's when there's deviations from established patterns and understood patterns. There may be certain websites, that are if somebody's on Silk Road and trying to buy heroin or ecstasy or something, bing, that should go off for everybody, not just a particular individual. But you can bespoke those parameters for the individuals, which I think will give a little more clarity into individual behavior. And at the end of the day, we probably, when those little red lights go off or the alarm bell rings, then you want to have a human who's trained in understanding the technology and what these applications are and how the system works to be able to make a human judgment to get to this lady's issue that she mentioned, where at the end of the day, if you're going to take an adverse action against somebody, you want to have a due process that's built into, and automation will only take you so far down that road. But I think the tools will get at a lot of that. So okay, she's a hijab wearing mathematician, she's got a norm, so plug her in and let her do her job, and as soon as it deviates, then then take a look at it. But otherwise, go with God.
Yeah, Hugh, if I could just add to that, one of the success stories, and there have been some improvements, no question about it. One of the improvements has been the time for initial clearance adjudication for people who have never had a clearance before has gotten much, much better, unless you've had any extensive foreign overseas time or have relatives overseas. So the very people who we would like to have, who have the experience and the background and the cultural understanding to be good intelligence officers, almost impossible to get them through. They go do something else because they get so strung along by the process and can't be without a job that long. So that is still a big issue for us.
Just on that point, the reason I'm here before you today is because my frustration came to a boiling point on this question because a former student of mine who had a grandma in the former Soviet Union, it took him 4 years to get his clearance. Now, that's not a good business model for government, the private sector, or for anybody if it takes you 4 years to bring on board the talent that you otherwise would want to hire today. Please, ma'am, up front. Yeah.
Hello, my name's Linda Recht. I've been a Foreign Service officer for about 30 years. My question is, I'm just thinking about the Navy Yard shooter and about the incentives that the companies have, like in that case, to not pay attention that the hotel is reporting the guy's talking to the microwave, and yet there's this pressure, let's just get the backlog down, just clear everyone, we're paying them by the clearance, by the investigation, so that the people that were working as the investigators, were pressured to get through them and do them as quickly as possible. How do you fix these perverse incentives?
I think in the past, I think the new digital approach is a way to do that, because there were pressures in defense before the responsibility went to the Office of Personnel Management. I remember General Cunningham had 500,000 periodic reinvestigations to conduct, hopelessly behind. And that was one reason when the IRPTA 2004 legislation occurred, it was felt that we had to find a way to improve the process and giving it to OPM, which was not really equipped, in my view, to take on this responsibility, nor was it resourced. But frankly, I believe that the answer lies in the future, because I think as of now, we're not where we have to be. It's where we have to go in the future. And the private sector, I think, in many respects, I know another company and a couple of other companies that are trying to do what Lockheed Martin is doing.
Okay, I think we have time for just one more question. The gentleman all the way in the back, I saw your hand first, and then I think we'll have to close with that.
Thank you. My name is Andrew, and I work for the Navy. Does the fact that both the Manning and Snowden leaks seem to be motivated by politics versus financial considerations or coercion by a foreign entity affect the type of information that we collect as part of this process? Do we need to ask more questions besides, have you ever tried to overthrow the government? Or is the current information enough? Do we need, again, additional questions, or do more computer auditing of classified systems, that type of thing, account for that type of behavior, or do we fundamentally need to change how we look at someone's perceived loyalty?
Well, I think it will require some changes. In the case of Snowden, I've seen some postmortems where they went back and looked at what he was doing digitally, and there were half a dozen or 8 sort of warning signs that any one of which alone might have seemed, minor or benign, but when you put them all together, there was clearly a pattern that should have, if somebody had that entire set of actions and behaviors, they might have reached a conclusion that something aberrant is going on here. So, I think we need to think of the threat across the spectrum. You have I think from stupid to evil. On the stupid side, you have people that just click on, well, let's see what happens when I click on this link, and the whole network goes down. And then you have evil people that are just willing to commit treason for money. And I would put Snowden very close to evil, because he was clearly somewhere between psychopath and sociopath, narcissist, and my view of the world and so forth. But the beauty of the digital type model is that you can, and Doug and his company, a lot of others, have just, you set the parameters. You figure out how many data sets you want to look at, where you want to rank things in terms of priority, and what should be a higher level concern. If somebody does this, well, that's not such a big deal, but if they do that, it's a very big deal. And then the algorithm figures out how to integrate all that and come to a bottom line conclusion that says, yeah, that's very problematic, and we need to intervene. So I think the solution to what you're suggesting is in the technology, and yes, it will require us to get out of the analog, arithmetic, incremental, paper-based, file card, index sort of model that is the way a lot of this stuff has been done historically.
During Randy's answer, he was pointing at me using the word evil, and I don't think he meant that. But along what you were saying is, I hate the phrase connecting the dots, but that's kind of what we're doing, if you will. Just because somebody has 1 or 2 or 3 concerning behaviors in the system does not mean they've done anything wrong, okay? It's when you start coupling all the other data in the tool together, then you have a question mark on somebody's issues going on, and you just need to peel it back. What it is, it's a very proactive approach to this problem set. And what I've seen in my time anyway, is I think we've approached this very reactively in the past. And that's not good enough today.
I would also add that I think it takes more of a partnership with government and industry too, because frequently industry has no idea when the government has detected anomalous information. And so we need to also share information, particularly when there is a heightened concern. So I think that's part of the solution as well.
I just want to reinforce what Joan just said. Right now, government really doesn't do that sharing with the private sector. If they see red flags about an individual who's a contractor, they tend to hold it inside in the initial investigation, whereas the private sector sometimes has, and will have in the future, far better insight on the employees and contractors and what they represent. Your question is very pertinent. Is there new loyalties today? Are we world citizens versus United States, Western civilization, et cetera? Those are, I think we have to have some new selectors that will try to differentiate and pull out the issues of loyalty.
Okay, and so with that, I'd like to thank Joan Dempsey, Charlie Allen, Randy Fort, Doug Thomas, and certainly to thank President Jane Harmon and the Wilson Center. And thank all of you for your good questions and your attendance today. Thank you.